Yep, we're ready.
Okay, October 18, 2014. Greetings from the San Luis Obispo Railroad Museum. My name is Glenn Madison, and today I'm talking with Bob McIntire. Mr. McIntire, what jobs did you have with the railroad?
Well, I finally got a job with the railroad in 1940. Well, I take it back. I started in 1939 on the Union Pacific in the fall. And I worked for them until they bought the Big Boys. Big Boy was the largest steam engine ever built in the world. It was a labor-saving device. And when they finally got 25 of them on the Western District over the Rockies from Alden to Cheyenne, I got laid off. And so then I came to San Luis Obispo for the Southern Pacific. And I worked here on the Coast Division of the Southern Pacific for 40 years. And I've been retired since 1982. And so anything that you might want to ask me about that, I can tell you a million stories.
Okay, well let's start with were you a fireman or an engineer?
I was a fireman. And when I started on the Union Pacific, they burned coal for fuel. They had their own mines at a place called Superior, Wyoming. And in the old steam days, you didn't have to sand out the engine like you did with the oil burner to get the soot out of the flues. The cinders took it out. But I was pretty well established over there, I thought, but I didn't know what was going on. In 1940, there was war in Europe and in Asia, and the United States, in preparation for that, started getting ready in case they got in that war. And they rebuilt the Panama Canal. And during that time, so they could get larger boats through it. So while the time they was doing that, traffic from Asia to Europe went across the land bridge here. And it went from San Francisco or Los Angeles to New York, and then over across the water to Europe. And so that summer, also in preparation, in case we ever went to war, the Union, and for these Big Boys, which was the largest steam engine that was ever built in the world, in order to use them on their track, they had to put in heavier steel. And they laid all new rail from Omaha to Ogden on every inch of their track. They had it made so that it come out in rotation order off the cars, and they just take it and put it down. If it was a 10-foot piece, there was a 10-foot piece come off. And anyway, the feat of this is remarkable. They laid all new steel. It's a double-track railroad in their yards, side tracks and all, in the summer of 1941. And that was, they put down 140-pound steel. That was based on a yard of track, weighed 140 pounds. And it was about maybe 7-8 inches high. A lot of people don't know it, but lot of science in the right of way. They have compensated curves and compensated grades. And what I'm talking about that is that if you make a curve at the speed that's required there, say it's a 40-mile-an-hour curve, that puts the thrust perpendicular on the rail instead of a side thrust. So they elevate the higher rail, both rails, so that at that speed, the thrust remains perpendicular to the rail. If you hit it too fast, it goes this way. If you get it too slow, it runs down this way. So it wants to bend the track over. But a lot of people don't realize it. It looks pretty awkward, but there's a lot of science in the right of way.
Now, speaking of curves, did you run on Cuesta Grade here?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little about experiences going over the hill to Santa Margarita and back?
Yeah, this grade was a drawback to Central Pacific acquiring that's part of the railroad, and also was the last part that was open because there's a mountain between San Luis Obispo and Santa Margarita. We're about 250 feet high here in San Luis Obispo, and Santa Margarita is 1,000 foot high. And Santa Margarita is near the headwaters of the Salinas River, and it runs down the hill all the way to Monterey Bay. And the Salinas River goes into Monterey Bay near Castroville. And then it's level around the bay to Watsonville, and then you go up over another divide, and then down into San Jose, and back at sea level again, going to the city. But in the course of these coastal right-of-ways, there was quite a lot of ups and downs and curves and one thing and another that is not really conducive to good railroad. They like a nice straight track, nice and flat.
Did you work on the cab ahead locomotives at all?
Yeah, that was a wonderful device. That cab ahead, what that really means is you put the people in front of the smokestack, going through the tunnels on a conventional engine where the smoke box is ahead of you. It's very hot, and the crew suffered badly. When I worked on the UP, we had a tunnel through the Rockies that was 7 or 8 miles long, and it required that you work steam all the way through. We didn't go through there fast or hard. We did it as easy as possible. But when you're behind the smokestack for 15, 20 minutes, it's pretty hot.
I can imagine.
And yet, in order to accomplish that, we had the mask that we put on our face. They were just tin funnels hooked on a hose, and we put waste in them with water, wet, and then you'd blow air through that, and it would give you somewhat of a cooler, cleaner air. And so that's what we had to use. But our cab ahead mallees were a wonderful device. They were an articulated engine. The boiler was not hinged, but the frame was hinged. And the smoke box end was on a slide where it could slide back and forth across. And it was supported by the train engine. But it was I think that Malley was a French invention, and it bore the name of the man that Mallet.
Right.
I think it's the back of it ended with T's, but was called Mallet. But anyway, it was a great experience to work on the railroad. I grew up, I was born in 1918, and this is 2014. So if you count the years, that's quite a while. Give me 4 more years and it'll be an even century. So I've seen a lot happen. When I moved to San Luis Obispo, there was 5,000 people here. And I lived in a chicken coop for 4 or 5 years. Because during the war, in the 41 to 46 years, they did not build any houses in the United States. They stopped construction. The total effort went into the war effort. Also, might make a point. Franklin D. Roosevelt inaugurated the collecting taxes as you went. But nevertheless, they paid for the war. That war was no for. The later wars, we all did them on the ticket. We charged them. But the idea of paying for what you get is a new idea.
And thinking back to your railroad experience, is there anything that stands out in your memory as being very funny, very humorous experience?
Oh yeah, we had all kinds of characters, as you can imagine. During the war here in San Luis Obispo, there was about 1,000 people working for the railroad, and about 500 of them in train and engine service. And they pretty well covered the gamut of people. There was lots of square pegs and round holes, and there was also excellent, real good men in jobs that was really beneath their qualifications. But we had different names for people. One guy was called the Rabbit. And as we go by these fields, if we'd stop, he'd glean some vegetables in a gunny sack, and he lived on vegetables. And so we called him the Rabbit because he was always nibbling. And so he went to the boss one day and he told Mr. Ketchum, he said, "I don't like that name, Rabbit." He said, "Can't you make him quit?" He said, "I don't think I could, son." He said, "They've been calling me elephant ears for years."
Want to take a break?
Yeah, we'll take a quick break here.
I'm curious if you ever had an experience where you maybe had a shifted load or a load that revealed itself and was a surprise to you. Did you ever get involved in any things when you were out on the road that came as a surprise in what you were pulling?
No, I was never surprised. We pulled everything. But the thing that happened one time, I was working on the Union Pacific out of Ogden on a helper. And we went up the hill towards Evanston where we used to cut off and turn around and come back. And we was on this big boy. It was the biggest locomotive that was ever built. It was wider and longer. And on the Union Pacific, the old grade was descending grade, and the new track that they laid after the original single track. Sometimes the rails parted quite a ways because they took some of the curves out and they made the ascending grade a little more gradual. But anyway, we was going around a place called Round Valley coming back, and the engineers was on the inside, not on the outside of the double track. They was on the inside. And my engineer was real curious, and he was kind of looking out, see how close we was to that other train. And the board come up by like this and hit him in the head. Took out his eye socket, and I was just a boy, just a young man, and there I was with an engineer damaged in a big locomotive. So I laid him down on the deck and I shut the throttle off and put the brake on. Then I decided there was no use to stop. I'd keep going till I come to a telephone booth. When I come to the telephone booth, I called the dispatcher and told him that Dan Kelleher had been injured by a board coming through the window, hitting him in the head. And that I needed a doctor at Morgan and the section gang at Morgan so that I could continue on to Ogden where the hospital was. In those days we wore a lot of clothes, so I had a jumper and a shirt and overalls on, and I took those off to get to my t-shirt, which was the cleanest piece of material I had. And I wet that, and I put that over his eye that was out on his cheek, hanging by the muscles and blood vessels and stuff. And believe it or not, that wound didn't bleed much. But all this bone structure was gone. And I laid him down. I put what little clothing we could under his head, pretty hard on an iron deck. And so I managed to fire the engine and run it and get it down to Morgan, and I got a section gang, got on, and a doctor. And so we went on down, continued another 25 miles down to Ogden, and I stopped out at the edge of the yard. I told the guy to have an ambulance meet me at the Sperry Mill at Ogden, and which they did. And when we got there, Mr. Kelleher got off that engine on his own power. He had to climb down a ladder, pretty big engine. And believe it or not, they repaired that eye. It was off for 2 years. They got that eye, they built a new socket, put it back in his head, and he finished out his time on passenger. Well, that's it.
Pretty amazing.
That was an amazing story for a young man to run into. Now you can see by looking at your right-of-way over the grade there, see how far they had to go to accommodate, had to go about 16 miles to accommodate an 8-mile drive on the highway. And another thing is about the grades that you don't notice it with a car. I see people coming down this side of the grade now. That's a 7% grade from the top. That's San Luis. They come down there 60, 80 miles an hour. in the old days, you used to put the car in second gear or low gear, come down there slow. It was crookeder, but and not nearly as well designed. If you'll notice sometimes when you come off the grade, some of it's down in the bottom of the canyon instead of up on the side. But it was quite a trick to take a train over the hill. I had in the steam days, sometimes we'd have, I've seen 6 locomotives on one train. And you'd have 2 on the front end, called them double headers. We was using everything during the war. They'd put 2 small engines on the head end, and then they had 2 10-2s basically. They were the 3700s, 3600s on the SP, but they were 2 10-2s, and they'd put 2 or 3 of them back in the train, and they would be cut in different lengths. And the reason for that being that a drawbar will only stand so much pull. So what they were doing, they'd get the weight back there, it would reduce the pull you had to put on the front end. Because in the old days, it wasn't as strong as they are now. You could pull the whole end of the car out. And that happens sometimes.
I can imagine with...
Especially when most of the destruction was done, testing them out as the old cars was replaced. You look at these little cars out here, out the window. They have wooden stringers under them. They didn't have steel rod up the middle, you know. Now they're all steel. The last trains I brought off the hill weighed around 12,000 tons, as against about 4,000 originally.
I can imagine with...
The drawbars were bigger and heavier, and then as we went into diesels, the pulling power is greater. With a steam engine, you developed your maximum tractive effort with high speed. But on a diesel electric, you get your maximum tractive effort from standing still. You can have your train on a slope like that. When you move the engine, the caboose moves. In the old steam engine, you couldn't do that. It could only move 2 or 3 cars at a time. So you'd have to take a little slack to get the engine started to moving. But that jerk was not always done nicely. Sometimes the train parted. It was a lot easier to run a diesel than to run a steam engine. And also, I don't think quite as dangerous. There was never anything so explosive as when you get dust on your crown sheet. You was going to heaven.
Not enough water on the
Yeah.
crown sheet.
Yeah, they get hot, then get red hot, then they pull off the rivets. The pressure inside was tremendous. One time, one of those cab forward Malleys blew up at near Salinas, and I think the boiler went out in the field a quarter of a mile, like a rocket. It left the truck, the wheels, and the heavy part of the locomotive on the track, and the boiler took off like a rocket. The minute you opened it up on one end, it went the other way. It was that didn't happen often, thank goodness, because we had two men on a cab, and safety was a big factor. The SP's motto was safety first, and they drilled safety, safety, safety all the time, because when you're handling big, heavy equipment, men's lives are at stake. The worst thing that, to me, that ever happened, that was that in early days, the roads in this country, when the automobiles come in, they should have separated the grade crossings. They should have had over and under, or some way to separate them so that the intersection wasn't there. When you have an intersection, that's where you have your wrecks. So they had a built-in system of danger. There was no way you could avoid it. I think the railroads played quite an important part of the industrialization of the nation. They go way back in history. Remember the gold rush to California? That gold that they took out of the Sierras paid for the industrialization of this nation. And it went from an agrarian society to a manufacturing industrial society. So the railroads played a big part of that because it could transport material. And easy transport was wonderful. Can you imagine how it would have been if you was trying to move something by wagon? What, 2, 4, 6 horse teams? Couldn't pull very much, few tons.
I'm curious if you ever had an experience where you maybe had a shifted load or a load that revealed itself and was a surprise to you. Did you ever get involved in any things when you were out on the road that came as a surprise in what you were pulling?
No, I was never surprised. We pulled everything. But the thing that happened one time, I was working on the Union Pacific out of Ogden on a helper. And we went up the hill towards Evanston, where we used to cut off, turn around, and come back. And we was on this big boy. It was the biggest locomotive that was ever built. It was wider and longer. And on the Union Pacific, the old grade was the descending grade, and the new track that they laid after the original single track, sometimes the rails parted quite a ways because they took some of the curves out and they made the ascending grade a little more gradual. But anyway, we was going around a place called Round Valley coming back, and the engineers was on the inside, not on the outside of the double track. They was on the inside. And my engineer was real curious, and he was kind of looking out, see how close we was to that other train. And the board come up by like this and hit him in the head. Took out his eye socket, and I was just a boy, just a young man, and there I was with an engineer damaged on a big locomotive. So I laid him down on the deck and I shut the throttle off and put the brake on. Then I decided there was no use to stop. I'd keep going till I come to a telephone booth. When I come to the telephone booth, I called the dispatcher and told him that Dan Kelleher had been injured by a board coming through the window, hitting him in the head. And that I needed a doctor at Morgan and the section gang at Morgan so that I could continue on to Ogden where the hospital was. In those days we wore a lot of clothes, so I had a jumper and a shirt and overalls on, and I took those off to get to my t-shirt, which was the cleanest piece of material I had, and I wet that, and I put that over his eye that was out on his cheek, hanging by the muscles and blood vessels and stuff. And believe it or not, that wound didn't bleed much. But all this bone structure was gone. And I laid him down. I put what little clothing we could under his head, pretty hard on an iron deck. And so I managed to fire the engine and run it and get it down to Morgan, and I got a section gang, got on, and a doctor. And so we went on down, continued another 25 miles down to Ogden, and I stopped out at the edge of the yard. I told the guy to have an ambulance meet me at the Sperry Mill at Ogden, which they did. And when we got there, Mr. Kelleher got off that engine on his own power. He had to climb down a ladder, pretty big engine. And believe it or not, they repaired that eye. It was off for 2 years. They got that eye, they built a new socket, put it back in his head, and he finished out his time on passenger. So that's it.
Pretty amazing.
That was an amazing story for a young man to run into.
Now, when you were based in San Luis, you ran north, or what the railroad called west, up towards San Luis.
Yeah, I went to Watsonville Junction.
And how about east or southbound, down towards Santa Barbara?
Southbound, we got off at Santa Barbara. And I learned something at Santa Barbara. Sometimes I used to clean up at the roundhouse. And then other times I would just come like I was working and then clean up in the hotel. But when you had to cross State Street, if you was cleaned up, they'd stop and let you go by. If you was dirty and hard working, you better run for your life. And they respected a man if he was cleaned up. So I've always tried to be cleaned up.
To make it safer to get across the street.
Yeah, they'll give you got a better chance of staying alive if you're cleaned up.
Now, I've heard that the boilers on the ACs were long enough that going along the coast, which was kind of a roller coaster, it was tricky to keep track of what the water level really was. Did you have any experience with that?
Well, yeah, it wasn't a case of having any problem. You see, water fits its own level. So if the crown sheet was right here, looking at this bottle, it'd have to have some water on it, see? But when you'd go downhill, the water would run down in the smoke box end, and so you wouldn't have so much water. So they had to make the ground sheet like this, see?
To slope to match.
Yeah. There was enough room to have 5 or 6 inches of water on top of the ground sheet.
Was it ever a problem to have too much?
Oh yeah, it got too much when it go off through the drive pipe and you get water in the cylinders instead of steam. The steam in the old original locomotives just had a hot drive pipe come out up here. But that's what they called a saturated engine. It was pretty wet steam. But the Germans are pretty smart people. And they invented an improvement for a steam boiler that was called a superheater. And what they did, they took the steam off up here and run it through a bunch of pipes that went through the boilers, through the big tubes in the boiler. So it would heat that steam while it was, the heat would heat that steam while it was en route to the cylinders, so that it was very hot and dry. Steam is an expansive gas. I think 1 gallon of water could fill this whole room. Many cubic feet of steam. 1 gallon would make lots of room. And I don't know whether you know it or not, but a locomotive is different than a place like where they made sugar with a stationary boiler. Stationary boilers, you could get maybe 60, 80, 90% efficiency out of the heat that you was using. But on a steam locomotive, they were a fast generating type, and they were very low efficiency. A steam locomotive only produced about 6% efficiency. You only use the hot steam one time. Goes in the cylinder and out stack. But the stationary boilers were much more efficient. But I don't think there was ever any more fascinating engine than a steam locomotive. It was quite a fascinating piece of machine.
Now, did you ever notice differences in the water depending on where you took on water, or the fuel, the character of the fuel oil? Did you have problems sometimes that you didn't have other times?
No. We treated our water. When you boil water, if you ever remember, your mother's teapot would be full of hard water. You ever remember that?
The minerals.
Yeah, the mineral content, that what we call the hard water. But anyway, somebody figured out one time there was some, down around Lompoc, they mined some earth down there. And if you run water through it, it'll take the calcium out. And I forget what they call that soil, but anyway, they would put it in a filter, and they'd run the water through it and get the mineral out. And then when they get full of calcium, in order to get it out of a water softener, you have to run water backwards through them to get the mineral out. You put salt in them and that loosen it up from the black sand. I forget what they call that black sand now. I've lost the word. But anyway, it was a great thing because it took the calcium out of the water, and so it made the water soft. And they would soften the water to the extent that when you dropped a drop of soap in an inch of water in a test tube, you'd get an inch of suds. And that was the desired water. And if they were using water that wasn't treated, they usually put some kind of dope in it to keep it from foaming. If you get too much water, too much foam, you get too much water into the cylinders. Don't work right.
Did they do those water tests here in San Luis?
Yeah, we had water testers. We had, wherever you had a water plug, they had a water. You had to have, we used to call them pump. A guy had that job over there. We were pumping the water, and he also treated it. The water was treated at Santa Margarita, and King City, and Salinas, and at Surf, and different places where we took water. Yeah, very, was much more efficient, saved the company a lot of money when they could have used soft water in the boiler. In other words, distilled water, get the mineral out. I don't know whether you realize it or not, but one of the reasons for going diesel was because they could use an internal combustion engine for power. But also, diesel oil was a waste product. In 1958, when we dieselized on the railroads in the United States, diesel oil was 6 cents a gallon. It was throwaway. Had no use for it. But there again, the German guy invented a thing to take care of that. Mr. Diesel invented a diesel locomotive, diesel engine.
You want to take a break? Wrap it up? How are we doing?
Well, I don't know. I could tell you 1,000 things, but I can't remember them all.
Well, let me ask you one more question since
Okay.
we were starting to get on the topic of diesels. Was there any particular manufacturer? We had EMD and Alco and Fairbanks Morse and various different models. Was there any one that you particularly enjoyed running or one that was a real bother to run?
Well, I don't think anybody ever built a better diesel locomotive than General Motors. There was Alco's and different ones of them. But the one that survived was the ones built by General Motors. I don't know whether it's quite a thing the way they transmit the power to the wheel. They didn't transmit the power from a diesel to the wheel with a gear and a clutch. It turned a turbine generator that produced electricity, and you administered the electricity to a traction motor on the axle of the locomotive, geared to the axle of the locomotive through a wire. out in series in electric. A starting motor, if you had a big heavy sawmill or something, you'd have to start that engine or that motor in series, and you hold the button in until it gets to moving, and after it's making a little noise you can let go of it, and then you put it in, it goes to parallel. So you have to think about looking at the armature on the electric motor. It's got a lot of copper things around on the commutator where the brushes are, and each one of them is a magnet. It's wrapped around iron, and it forms an electromagnet, and it pulls it one notch, then the other one pulls it to the next, and so forth. Makes the motor go around. But in the transmission of the power from the diesel, you create electricity by turning the turbine. You move the electricity through a wire to the traction motor to start in series, then it went to series parallel, then it went to parallel, and then it went to parallel shunt. In other words, when you start out, the amp meter goes up like this, and then as you start moving, it starts dropping down. When it gets down so forth, then they change it and only put juice in every third or fourth wire, and then maybe every sixth.
Well, I have a question about that. I've heard that on the early diesels, the transition from series to parallel through those stages wasn't automatic like it is now. You had to know when to do that. Did you go by?
I never
did that.
Never had anything like that.
So you didn't.
No,
you have to watch the amp meter or listen for the sound.
It was all automatic. I never run an engine that you had to do that. Maybe there were. I imagine there were engines that maybe had to change the transition by hand, but I never had one.
Was there any thought that you'd particularly like to leave our museum audience with about railroading in San Luis Obispo?
Well, San Luis Obispo was chosen many years ago by Spanish conquistadors that come up the coast and under Father Sierra, and they build a resting place about every horseback ride apart, and that San Luis Obispo was one of them. But from that time until the rails come and highways and airplanes and things, other forms of transportation, this was always a point of transportation. In other words, come from someplace to San Luis Obispo. And as a result, it worked out that this became a sub-terminal for the Coast Division. San Francisco was the main terminal, but you had San Jose and Watsonville, and San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara. It was a point, San Luis Obispo, when I came here, the railroad was the biggest employer.
Well, Bob McIntire, born 1918, employee of the Union Pacific, employee of the Southern Pacific, longtime resident of the San Luis Obispo area. We really thank you for sharing your experiences with us, and we hope you can come back and tell us more sometime.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting there's a little nostalgia with me with the railroad. I had lots of good memories of the railroad. The SP was known as a friendly railroad. They was pretty good to their employees. The Union Pacific is much more severe, a little more money-minded. They're pushing out. They're hard on their employees. They have to be right up to snuff all the time or you're in trouble. We're going through quite a change in our country. I don't know how it's all going to work out. There's tremendous inflation we have. It's something else. What do you suppose the biggest rent I ever paid was?
Oh, I don't know, about $200 a month?
$50 a month. And when I bought my house that I've lived in since 1950, I was making $5.35 a day. And a woman could stay home, take care of the kids. We have no control over prices. An automobile, the last car I bought cost more money than all the other cars I ever had in my whole life. The prices have increased staggeringly fast.
Well, that explains the $1 a word you were going to charge us for.
Huh?
That explains the $1 per word that you were going to charge us for.
Well,
Sharing your...
it would have been pretty cheap.
I'm glad we got it before it went up to $1.50.
And according to when I used to get an ice cream cone for a nickel at Thrifty's, it now costs $2 or $3 for a cone.
Well, I can't beat you on the nickel, but when I was in college, we'd walk over to Thrifty's on Foothill, and it was 10 cents a scoop. And so from there on, we figured everything in terms of how many scoops of ice cream it was worth.
Yeah, well, that's about
Became our
the way I
currency.
did it. But I used to get it for a nickel. So you can see now when the kids not eating much ice cream, they can buy beer cheaper. Well, say our prayers. It's a wonderful country, great piece of real estate in California, in the United States. We've got lots to be thankful for.
Well, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIntire.
Did you ever know an engineer that worked out of probably San Jose named Billy Jones?
Well, anybody ought to know of Billy Jones, but I do not remember.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up in Los Gatos.
That's probably after my time or before.
He was a city guy. He was a city guy.
Did you know him, Jim?
Okay.
You did?
He had a little steam railroad in his orchard up where I grew up, and that was every Sunday he ran that. He was my hero my entire life. Yeah. It had painted, that little engine was painted daylight colors.
Yeah.
Oh. So, Mr. McIntire, don't you think that Jim should agree to do an interview too?
Yeah, he could.
See?
He could tell you more than I could because.
I don't know. You were pretty interesting.
Yes. I learned more, I think, listening to this today than
Yeah.
all the books I've read about railroading in my life. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No doubt.
So, Mr. McIntire, do you think you'd like to come back and do another interview someday? Do you think you have more stories to share?
Well, I don't know whether you could keep me on a different track.
Well, maybe we can set it up someday.
yeah.
I'm in the final stages of my life. I don't know how much longer I can live.
Yeah, well, we'd
I'm
like to
getting-
hear more of your
I'm
stories.
getting pretty slow.
Oh, you're doing great.
Yeah,
I look
you're doing
great.
better than a lot of people younger than
Looks are
you.
deceiving.
Dad, you remember the story you told about coming down the hill at Choro on a steam engine at night in the siding? The train going by, going uphill, and how deceiving it was with the speed, how fast you were going,
Yeah,
how the engineer was fighting it all the way down in that siding.
yeah,
Remember that story?
yeah. For instance, have you ever been parked somewhere in an automobile and somebody moves out and you think you're moving? Well, that same effect as when you're heading in a sidetrack. Can you imagine taking a train in a sidetrack that requires you to get within about 3 or 4 car lengths of a switch to get the caboose in the clear on the other end?
And you're on the long nose forward on a steam engine.
And you're going downhill on a heavy grade, and one guy's going up, and you're trying to get down to so that he can go. If I think about it now, I would have waited till he stopped
And then creep.
and then creeped out.
What about being down there in the siding at Conception all night for the troop trains, letting that Mally cool off during the night? How
Yeah,
you get back out of there?
I was in a, I don't think it was Conception, but I was in a sidetrack one night. There was so many trains coming against me I couldn't move. And I kept putting the fire out, and finally I couldn't start the firebox got so cold. I couldn't start the oil again. And I went out and tore a fence down and put it in there and built a wooden fire in there and got it burning so I could get the oil lit up
Yeah.
again.
That's great.
If that hadn't worked, I'd have got fired.
Ever rebuild the fence?
No,
Now, was the concern that you were using so much oil, just keeping the fire going, sitting there, that you'd get low before you had to reach the end of the run? Or?
yeah, that was a factor, but it's pretty hard to sit up all night when you're tired.
And that oil had to be heated from the tender way back there, so it would flow up into the burner at the front of the.
So you were running steam back to the tender to keep the oil
Hot, yeah.
fluid enough that,
And if you didn't have enough steam and it didn't stay hot, it wouldn't flow. And when you
You
tried
had
to come in,
5 pounds pressure on the Mally, so you had to put 5 pounds of air on top of the oil in the tank. That'd give it the desire to flow to the fire valve. You couldn't do that with coal. So you couldn't transfer the coal from a tender around the engine and bring it in the front end. But with oil you could do it with a pipe. But all it took was a little air pressure. But you
What
did
about-
that.
what about starting a train, sugar beets up on the grade?
Oh.
When you have maybe a couple of EMDs and a General Electric in the consist.
It was you had to make sure the brakes was released.
You take a little slack,
No, you couldn't take no slack. They were hanging out tight. And you just held your breath, hoping that they would come.
well, how about the GE loading different than the EMDs? How long it took to get any power up?
I never got that technical. Whatever I had on the needle on the front engine. I never noticed it. But in fact, I don't think I had too many locomotives that had a mixed concept.
That made it tough.
Yeah, I think they was mostly put together all General Electrics or the other one. What was that engine that had the long engine in it that didn't have a V8 engine in it? That made so much noise.
The General Electric.
No.
No, I'm not following what you think.
There was a locomotive that we used, a few of them. They were pretty good locomotives, but they had a tremendous bark.
May have been the Alcos, those last vintage Alcos.
No,
I can't think of what you're...
it wasn't the Alco. Well, anyway,
What was it like when you got called down there in the roundhouse in the middle of the night for a Mally and you had to get engine over into the yard? You go to work with an engine usually sitting on the high line waiting for you.
a hustler.
Well, what would you do? You're called to go on a helper and you get a 210-2 or a Mally.
Oh yeah.
You got to get a herder to get over to the yard.
Yeah, they had to take you over in the yard, and the switch engine would pull part of the train back, and you'd back on the train and then pull it in, make it go.
So you're sitting in the middle of the yard and all night waiting for an air test.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty difficult communicating without any radios all down through there.
Yeah, it was in the old days. The old days, they had to have enough brakemen to pass signals. Might take 10 men to get a signal to the engine.
Wow.
But now you do it with a telephone.
Did you ever cut a helper out of Serrano coming when the crossovers so you could drop back to Margarita and shove another guy?
Yeah,
And how difficult was it to get the train put back together?
yeah, it was quite a task.
I'm just going to add that the other voice we've been hearing is Jim McIntire, son of Bob McIntire and a railroad veteran himself.
Kibitzing.
Jim had some great experiences. He was a good engineer, and the company recognized his talent, and they hired him as a road foreman of engines and sent him up to Elko, Nevada to be the boss up there.
That was my punishment. Banished to Elko.
But it was a kind of a good experience.
It's a wonderful time, wonderful time.
Is there a third generation of railroaders on the way?
Actually, his father worked from about 1918 to 61, I believe, for the Southern Pacific. And then Dad from 41 on the SP till 81. I hired out in 64 in engine service till I retired in 2006. And my son is an engineer out here now. He hired out in 92 or 3, I believe, something like that. And he's still going, so.
We need to get all three of you in here sometime.
Yeah,
That'd be a pretty rowdy group.
Yeah, just stay out of the way.
as long as they recognize that I was the best. That's
Well, that's true.
Doug would argue that.
I think that my family has improved with each generation. I think they're more handsome,
I'll agree.
smarter. Don't you?
That's true in my family, yeah. I don't know where they get their looks and their intelligence, I think, from my wife.
Did you ever stop to think how many grandparents you've got? In 9 generations, you have 528 sets of grandparents.
If you
So
go
if
back
your
far
name is
enough,
Jones, there's only a little bit of you that's Jones.
if you go back far enough, we're all related, probably.
Yeah. I think maybe we were. I believe we were. I think we're children of God. We can live and die, and we don't change the weight of the earth. It's never any heavier than it was originally. But the twinkle in your eye, in your spirit, is the part we get from the Almighty. And the life. For instance, just to take a fly, a house fly, he can land upside down on the ceiling. We can't make a helicopter do that. But life, the thing that makes an animal or a man or a woman alive, that's the trick.
Mr.
Ma'am.
McIntyre, I want to thank you so much for coming today. We're just about out of time right now, but I'd like to invite you to come back again sometime if
Okay.
Jim could manage to bring you. And I think it would be a wonderful idea to have you and maybe your son too, if you could get him to come.
Unfortunately, he lives in Albuquerque now.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we could just get the two of you to have a conversation about things that you remember. Would that be possible?
Sure.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I'll try to set up a schedule a time with you.
I'll bring the next time I come, I'll bring a seniority roster
Oh, that would be wonderful.
so that I can look at names and they'll remind
Oh.
me of them.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
I
And-
would love that.
And that will help me because I guess some of that information is lost that's in my brain.
But it would come back to you
But
if
it
you
would
saw.
come back to me if I
Right.
see something that would
Right.
remind me.
Right.
So I made this trip up here without, all I did to prepare for this trip, I did take a bath.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We appreciate that.
Well, it is sort of Saturday. I guess that's all right.
Once a week, whether we need it or not.
Really? Okay.
Well, now
Well,
you
thank
think
you.
about that a little bit. This water situation in California is pretty scary.
Bad.
In our town here now, they say I can water. My number is 128, an even address. Even people can water on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. And the bill is so high, you can't afford to water anyway.
Oh, geez.
They've caused us to quit. I have a big yard,
Oh, really?
and so I can't afford to water it anymore.
And where are you now?
Huh?
Where are you living now?
I live at 128 Cassett Street.
Oh, here in
out by
town.
the theater.
Oh, yeah.
I thought maybe you were from living out of town.
No,
No, he lives nearby.
no, we have, this city water we have here costs lots of money.
It does. They say they have enough, which is good,
They
but
got
it's
enough for a year or
expensive.
so.
But it's expensive, yeah. Well, at least you know you have it. I feel sorry for the people up in Cambria.
Yeah,
I don't know what they're going to do.
We gotta go desalinization, I think that's
I
long
think
term.
so.
well, you can look at the Hearst Ranch, we've been talking about that. They have no water up there.
Yeah. I know. Last night, Jim and I were both up at Hearst Castle last night, and I was talking to Bob and Sylvia Huth. You know, they live there locally, and they just were saying, you know, we don't know what we're going to do. We just hardly have any water to use.
The only place there's any water is out in that ocean. Got to be desalinized. That's going to take electric energy.
Yeah.
Did you go to that dinner they had in the spring with the new guides? Somebody had it up there in Cambria at their home, and I really don't know whose home we were at. Beautiful big home in Cambria, just gorgeous thing, and it was just heartbreaking. Their lawn looked like this floor. There were no flowers. Everything was dead.
Yeah.
Really kind of brought it. They'd worked so hard to design this yard.
Yeah. And it was gone. Okay, well, thank you
We
so
thank
much
you.
for coming.
But
Yes.
we really do need to say your prayers. That's the only hope you have for water.
I think you're right.
Did you ever,
We don't have any control over it.
did you ever think what a wonderful thing water is?
Every time it rains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Water is H2O. I'll show you a little bit of the reason in that reasoning. The atmosphere is hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and impurities. But about 60% nitrogen, which is heavier. The hydrogen is one of the lightest elements in the world. So when the water turns to vapor, because 2 parts of it is hydrogen, makes it lighter than the atmosphere. So it floats up. And then when the sun shines on the atmosphere, it makes wind, blows it across the country,
Yeah.
and delivers water over this whole country without any rusty pipes.
Over the whole world, yeah.
Yeah, now just think about that. That's just water. But look at the, if you take a rock that's got iron in it, you crack it up, you get it down till you just have a fine grain of sand. Then you crush that grain of sand till you get neutrons and protons. And then you can go beyond that. You can crush those and have atoms. And I guess when you get below atoms, it's too dangerous to crack again.
You gotta be real careful.
Yeah, it can have bad results, right?
Yeah.